Hello and welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us for the webinar today. We're going to hold off on starting for just a moment while we let everyone log on. In the meantime, feel free to open up the chat and let us know where you're joining us from. While we wait for people to do that, I'm also going to launch a quick poll here. So the question is, what is your organization's biggest challenge in measuring employee engagement? So let me just publish that. Awesome, that poll is live if you guys want to open that up and answer. Would love to hear what challenges you are all facing currently in your roles. Awesome, so we're just gonna kick things off now. We'll dive right in. So hey everyone, and welcome to our event series, HR GameChangers. This is a multi-theme, multi-episode series, and today is our third episode. We are talking about measuring engagement and the tools and metrics that matter. If you have peers or colleagues that would like to join the series, please share the registration link with them. I'm gonna drop that in the chat real quick for you all. Awesome. And as a side note, we will have a live Q&A at the end. So if you think of any questions during the webinar, please share those in the chat during that time, and I'll make sure to pass them over to our panel. So now let's do some quick introductions. My name is Alexa Frank. I am the Senior Content Manager here at GoProfiles, a GoLinks company. GoProfiles is an AI employee engagement, recognition, and rewards platform. Joining us, we have Ray Smith, the SVP of People and Culture at Arbinger Institute. Welcome.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah. Next, we have Hallie, the Senior Director of People at Chili Piper. Welcome.
Thank you. Excited to be here.
And to round out the panel, we have Jav, HR Director at CTM Medical. Welcome. You're good. So excited to have you all here and can't wait to get your thoughts on the topic today. Sorry, Jav, did you find the mute button?
I did. Sorry, of course, none of the things that need to be working are working, but I'm very excited to be here and chat with everyone today.
Thank you. Awesome. So before we dive into the meat of today's episode, I want to quickly introduce GoProfiles so you can understand why we're passionate about this topic of measuring engagement. So GoProfiles is an AI-powered employee engagement platform designed to boost engagement and improve culture. We offer features that not only help you boost and improve engagement, but also measure engagement, which is what we're talking about today. If anyone is interested in seeing how this tool works, we actually have a free trial. So I'm going to grab that link and throw it in the chat for you all. Would love to have you all try out the tool for free and see how you like it. But also, panel, I'd love to hear your thoughts really quick. How have you seen tools like GoProfiles improve company engagement and culture within your organization?
Ray, you can go ahead.
Okay. I think one of the ways that I've seen a tool like GoProfiles improve engagement overall is it gives greater visibility to every employee within the company, and it allows employees to have that same visibility. One of the nice things about GoProfile, especially in an environment like ours where we're remote, is you actually have a map of where all of the employees are located. And so if somebody's traveling there, they can easily connect with another employee and say, you know, I'm going to be in town. Do you want to grab lunch or something like that? So it helps people to engage with each other as well. Sorry, Jav, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, you know, tools like GoProfiles, I think it's super important because it allows, as HR professionals, for us to be able to see how our people are feeling, how satisfied they are with the work that they're doing, and it allows us to kind of quantify something that has traditionally been very qualitative.
Yes, thank you for sharing. I definitely agree with all that. Before we dive into some of the discussion points, I wanted to share some stats to start off with. So the correlation between employee engagement and operational success is high. A multitude of studies share that an engaged workforce leads to 17% increase in employee productivity, 21% increase in company profitability, and 30% more likely to focus on innovative solutions driving operational improvements. So panel, would anyone like to share thoughts on these stats? What are you guys currently seeing in the industry?
Yeah, I would say none of this is super surprising. I think we've seen a lot of research being done around how profitability is kind of tied to employee engagement. And I think if anything, it just kind of makes it even more clear how, your people are so closely tied with how well you do as an organization and how it needs to be invested in. So not super surprising, but it's great to have the numbers to be able to back that up.
Yeah, for sure. Awesome. So we'll keep moving along. These stats will tie into some of the questions we have. So now it's a good time to share our discussion points for the day. So we're going to be covering the correlation between engagement and organizational success, what employee engagement entails and why it's crucial to measure it, key KPIs for measuring employee engagement, tools for measuring employee engagement, and then some best practices for analyzing data to drive continuous improvement. For anyone currently listening in, please remember, if you have any questions during the webinar, we'd love to hear them. Please post them in the chat during our Q&A time, which we'll have at the very end, and I'll make sure to pass those over to our panel. But now let's dive into some discussion questions that I have for you guys. Excited to hear your thoughts on all of these. So the first question that we have today is, what are the key metrics that provide the most accurate measure of employee engagement?
One of the key metrics that HR uses for sure is turnover. That's one of the big metrics that we use. Unfortunately, that metric it's after the problem is happening, right? But that is one of the key metrics that we use as well. I'll turn over to my other colleagues as well.
Yeah, so we use, so what's interesting is retention and turnover metrics are a common metric to use. So this was new to me when I actually joined Chili Piper. So our CEOs don't like to use retention metrics as an engagement indicator. And part of the reason is because they feel that it kind of puts us in a situation where we're encouraging people to stay, even if it's not in their best interest to stay. So while I have used that everywhere else, I don't currently use that. But what we do use is employee net promoter score. We also use the Culture Amp engagement index questions. And then one of the things we're kind of looking at using is around participation measurements. So this is something we're exploring right now. I guess when we think about employee engagement, we think about that discretionary effort that people put into their role. And so some of the stuff we're looking at is beyond survey participation, what are other voluntary activities that an employee could participate in. And we try to do we're looking at using a spectrum of those things, because obviously if we were to just use our company trip attendance, there's barriers to people being able to attend. If they're a single parent, as an example, that doesn't mean that they're not engaged. It just, we want to try to meet people where they're at too. So that's another thing that we're kind of exploring the use of.
Yeah, I mean, and just to add on, because I think we've covered a few, is internal promotion rates and things like that also give us a sense of kind of how engaged is your team, how are they kind of progressing in their careers with your organization. So I would add that as well.
Awesome. Are you guys seeing these metrics differ across industries or company sizes, or do you find these are pretty across the board?
I would say it definitely depends on the organization and the industry you're in, right? I think what matters to one business may not matter as much to another. And so I think what's really important as an HR professional is just making sure that whatever you're doing is aligned to the business need. And that's going to change across the board. So for sure, I think different.
Totally
Awesome.
agree.
Yes, the next question I have for you guys, how can companies effectively measure engagement in a remote or hybrid work environment specifically?
I think it's similar to some of the pieces that my colleagues mentioned with regards to measuring it by participation. I think what Haley said really does help with the remote type of environment as well. So in a remote environment, you're trying to constantly think of ways to engage in team members and get them involved within the company outside of just their day-to-day job. And so if you have those programs in place and you're in a remote environment, it's a great way to measure whether people are truly engaged or whether they're just like, I just want to turn off my computer and do what I need to do. And so I think that's a great way to measure it.
Yeah, I think a lot of it is just like it definitely tailoring to like your company's culture and like what are the things that you do at your business that again like are available for people to be participating in across teams. So like for us, it's one of the things we utilize is like decision memos. Anybody, any level can participate or write a decision memo at Chili Piper. And so that's one of the things we're sort of looking at with regard to participation to be measuring around engagement.
Awesome. Do you guys have any? Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Sorry. And another piece that helps really in a remote environment because you don't see people every day is that survey participation, right? So doing a traditional culture survey, an annual culture survey, but then having pulse surveys in between those times so that you can really measure what the trend is as well, because annually just doesn't give you enough information about a trend.
That makes sense. Do you guys have specific tools that you're using for tracking engagement or using for surveys that you'd like to share?
Sure. So we use, we were using Culture Amp, but we just recently switched over to the talent tool that's within the HiBob HRIS system. It's evolved a lot. I think that since the first time I used it, and we've been pretty happy with it. But I think that one of the things, I guess, that I have been trying to do more of is like, I guess like beyond just that like surveying tool is like looking at the other things like, okay, Slack as an example. How can we run reports in Slack to see like how like often and I guess like how frequently people are communicating on the tool, how many groups people are in. So just like sort of looking at the tools that people are using on a regular basis and trying to like utilize the data that you can in those to sort of support employee engagement efforts.
Awesome. I'll move on to the next question. It's an interesting one. I'm curious how you guys differentiate between engagement and employee satisfaction in your metrics and why maybe this distinction is important.
I think for us, I kind of look at it as two different things, satisfaction being more so about things that I feel like are a little bit more tangible. So compensation, benefits, how they feel about kind of where they're working versus it feels like engagement is more kind of the emotional side of things. So I think you can weave both in when you're doing an engagement survey and trying to get feedback. But I think sometimes the pieces around engagement can be a little bit more of the intangible versus, satisfaction feels a little bit more concrete sometimes.
I think the engagement on my side, I think engagement is tied more, as Jav said, more to their goals and what they feel like their potential is within the company, as opposed to maybe benefits that we're offering and their satisfaction with regards to the company offerings as a whole. But agree, I think that if you tie both of them in, it gives you a better number.
Yeah, agree. I think that satisfaction is obviously an element of employee engagement, but it's more, if you were to focus only on that, it feels way more short term than employee engagement does. So I guess like we try to, yes, like I guess we're trying to meet basic needs, if you want to think about it that way, with regard to like compensation and benefits. But like if you're looking at employee engagement, like that's something that sort of like you continue to evolve over time. So it's like the long game.
That makes sense. Yeah, that's a good point. Our next question we have for you guys: what role does employee feedback play in shaping engagement metrics? So, and how do you guys ensure feedback collected is honest and actually reflects the employee sentiment?
I would say that in terms of kind of making sure that it's honest, I think that's up to the company. At the end of the day, I think if people feel like there's a level of trust and honesty within the organization, they're going to be much more likely to give that feedback. But I think to take it a step further, it's what you do with that feedback. I think if people kind of give the feedback and feel like nothing is changing and they're adding us the exact same questions, giving the same feedback, you're likely to have people kind of not trust that it's going to go anywhere. So I think part of it is just them trusting the organization and knowing that what they say is going to go somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
And I think giving employees the opportunity to give feedback as we build engagement pieces, it also allows for greater ownership. And so employees are more likely to hold on to those pieces with regards to engagement and be more engaged if they feel like they actually have a voice in what's being shaped for them overall.
Yeah, I also think it's important, especially, I guess, when looking at feedback from like an engagement survey or something like that, to think of it as a starting point for conversation. So oftentimes I've heard from leadership teams that, oh, like this feedback isn't actionable. And yeah, like it's not necessarily going to tell you exactly what to do, but it's intended to help start a conversation. And I think that if you approach that feedback in terms of like it's a feedback loop or like it's a conversation that you're having, I think you're more likely to get honest feedback if you're actually showing interest in what it is people are saying. I guess another thing I do, and I would imagine that other people in my field do, is I have a lot of conversations with people around our business regularly. I make myself very open to be here for people to, even if it's just vent about something. You just want to like throw it out there that you're irritated about something. There's no action you're expected to be taken, but like you're frustrated by something. I think those regular conversations are also helpful for me to gauge if we're getting 100% honesty, like that. In our surveys or feedback loops too, because you sort of have a pulse on some of the things that are going on.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely agree with that. I think, yeah, the communication element of just making yourself available to listen, it's important. So love that. Switching gears a little bit. So everybody's talking about AI. It's the big thing right now. So how have you guys used AI or machine learning tools to enhance the way you're measuring employee engagement?
I can say on my end, AI has been just incredible with regards to being able to filter through some of the feedback that you get and then being able to categorize it and really make it actionable, right? Because in most surveys and in most feedback that you get, you have open items where people are just putting in information for you. And back in the day, good gracious, it took forever to go through all of that stuff. And AI now allows us to sort it, and we can say, I need this in categories, and then those categories become actionable, and it's a better way to just present to overall leadership of here are the trends that we're seeing, and then to really give some guidance on that based off of those trends.
Yeah, I would agree. Same thing. I think it's about simplifying in a way the data that you get, because in a lot of cases you get so much of it. So knowing kind of how to put it together and make it digestible, not just for yourself, but for your leadership team, is huge.
Awesome. Yeah, it's definitely helped us in the same ways here at GoProfiles. Just speeds up your workflows and does some of that busy work for you. Another question I have for you guys. So would love to hear, in your opinion, what are some early indicators of disengagement and how can they be measured proactively?
I think we've kind of talked about some of this stuff before, but if your ENPS is going down, if your survey participation rates are lower, I think that gives you an indication. But something as simple as, are you onboarding people and they're resigning within the first 3 to 6 months? That probably gives you a sense of something not going kind of the way you wanted to. So I think kind of those pieces together, if you start to look at it, I think they'll give you an indication of what's happening.
I've also noticed with regards to disengagement, there seems to be an increase in employee relations issues when there's some disengagement involved. And so if you keep your pulse on that trend, it kind of tells you, okay, I feel like there's something going on there that maybe I need to dive deeper into, but it's a good indication of it.
Do you guys have any strategies on acting quickly based on any of these early warning signs?
I think having conversations with people, I mean, I feel like that is like my MO in terms of like what to do. Well, let's just like try to have a conversation, try to get a grasp on like what's going on, right? Because I feel like without that sort of, maybe we call it qualitative data, it's really hard to take those trends and like take action on them. So yeah, I would say like my first step would always be like have a conversation, because I would imagine in a lot of those surveys you're putting out there, you have demographic data. So sometimes that could point to like, do I have specific teams within my org that are like dealing with signals of like disengagement or things like that? Is it a specific team manager that's struggling, and like how can I get feedback from their direct reports, and then how can I also work with them to provide the support that they need for their team, different things like that. So
I'd have to agree. I don't think there's ever going to be a substitute for old-fashioned conversation, right? And people will open, if you've established those relationships, people are going to open up to you, which is part of the value of a human resource department and a trusted human resource department, because people will come and they'll be open about things. And you can't take action on everything, but if you at least give a listening ear and are able to take action on some things, people are more likely to continue to have dialogue with you on a regular basis.
Yeah, I would totally agree. I would also say in a lot of cases, at least in my experience, you have that sense prior to sometimes the data kind of reflecting that. So if anything, the data kind of backs up what you may have already been experiencing. And to Hallie's point, you're having those conversations, and that's already giving you an inkling of where kind of the metrics are going to go.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, can't get away from what a good conversation and a listening ear can do. Switching gears, so curious, how do you guys ensure engagement metrics are aligned with broader business outcomes?
I would say the main thing is just understanding what your business outcomes are fundamentally, and ensuring that what you have kind of aligns to that. Like we mentioned before, that's going to be different in different industries, different companies. But if you're not ensuring that what you're measuring means something to the business, then it's just kind of an academic exercise. So,
yeah, I think too often some groups don't see the value of having HR at those strategic tables, right? And so there's this perception of, okay, we can do all this strategy and we can put our outcomes together. We can align our goals, but we're just going to have HR monitor the behaviors or those kind of things. But we can be a valuable partner if we have a seat at the table, because we are then helping to communicate those, but then we are everything that we're shaping and building is aligned with the overall goals of the company. And so it's critical that HR does have a seat at that table and that we have a good, clear understanding of what the company outcomes are supposed to look like. And then we can help leaders design KPIs aligned with that.
Yeah. Do you guys have any specific examples of how engagement metrics have influenced a key business decision? I would love to hear if you guys can think of any.
I think in the past, I would say I've used some of those engagement pieces to talk through policy and to shape some of our policy decisions, and also how we enforce our policies, right? Because policies are written a certain way, everything's open to interpretation. And so based off of feedback that we're getting with regards to engagement and those types of things, we're able to better influence policy. And I'd say that's a really good way that those engagement surveys have helped me, at least me in the past, with regards to policy development.
Yeah, I oftentimes use employee engagement surveys or even just broadly like employee feedback opportunities that are in the form of surveys in our decision-making process, which again, as I mentioned earlier, is a decision memo. So basically any large decision at Chili Piper, we go through the decision memo process. So as an example, this is well known with our employees, so I feel comfortable saying it. But there was question about if we wanted to continue with an open paid time off policy, as an example. And so I utilized, feedback that we had received from employees to have data points to sort of make the case that yes, like we wanted to keep this. So I think that's another way that we also motivate employees to participate in the survey, to see that that data and their feedback is actually being used to inform, bringing back an employee development stipend that maybe we discontinued because we didn't feel like we had a lot of participation in it. Or again, keeping an open paid time off policy, or things like that. I guess it's also helpful in terms of being able to, again, sort of try to correlate certain things over time. So, yeah.
Yeah, I love that. Getting their feedback, and by them knowing you're actually going to use it, they're obviously going to want to give you their feedback. So that's awesome. We have one last question before we go more into a live Q&A. But what we have for the last question is, how should organizations balance quantitative engagement metrics with qualitative insights?
I think that actually just kind of mirrors what Hallie was saying, right? So it's you have the surveys and you get that those metrics and you get that feedback, which is great, but the context that goes with it and, being able to dig in to understand where people are coming from and what pushed them to provide those answers, I think is that piece. So I think those two together are super helpful. But as Hallie said, that's all it really takes.
Yeah, I think it's total, having both pieces really helps you tell the story. If you have just one, you're sort of left to your own, I guess, vices to figure out why the metrics are what they are. So with that qualitative data, you really have a lot more to support, some of the reasoning and then also some of the recommendations you make, right? So yeah, I think both are super important.
Awesome. So we'll dive into our Q&A time, our live Q&A. So like I said, if anyone has questions for the panel, please drop them into the chat. And we do already have one in here from Miguel for Hallie. He asks, how does ENPS and EEI compare? Since you were using both, which one do you think is most accurate in measuring and predicting engagement? Oh, I think you're on mute, sorry.
Still on mute.
Hallie, can you hear me? I think you're on mute. I'm sorry.
I was like, I always do that. I'm like, and internal calls and external calls apparently.
So hard to remember.
So EEI, I assume, is Employee Engagement Index. So I guess to make sure we're clear too, because maybe some people don't know what is involved in the Employee Engagement Index. The Employee Engagement Index, I think, it's 5 questions. The EMPS question is actually one of the 5. So the other questions are like around what motivate, like if you're feeling motivated beyond what you, or like to go beyond what you would do like at another company, basically. And then one is like, if you're proud to work for the company, you rarely think about looking for another job. And then the other one is like, I see myself working at this company. I think the default is like for 2 years time. We use 1 year because that's sort of the standard in our industry. So I think the Employee Engagement Index gives you a fuller picture potentially. I guess it's hard to say which one specifically I think shows or like has a higher correlation to like, or higher accuracy on employee engagement. I would think maybe the Employee Engagement Index. I think if I'm kind of like thinking about it a little bit closer, I think if I'm being honest, one of the reasons I sort of like ENPS over the index is because sometimes I feel like the numbers are a little higher. So that makes me feel better personally. But I think if you're looking at like accuracy, I would think probably the index is probably your better bet.
Awesome. Any other thoughts from anyone on that?
Yeah, I would agree. I think just the more questions you have, the more data that you get, right? So to your point, sometimes that one question does make us feel a little bit better, but when you add in the context of the other questions, sometimes it shifts and I feel like you get a truer picture.
Perfect. He says, thank you for answering. So a few other questions that we had submitted earlier this week. One of those is, what are the biggest challenges that you guys have faced when rolling out engagement and measurement tools?
I would say that there are a bunch. I think first and foremost, it's making sure that the business is aligned, right? And understanding why you actually want to have a tool like that in place. Hopefully you're working somewhere where the leadership team understands that, but that sometimes can be a barrier. And then it's just like, there's the change management piece of having people using a tool that they haven't used before. There is the technology piece that they're going to have to learn how to use another piece of technology. And then from there, I think it's just kind of having people understand how that process works, why it's important, and then rolling that out. So I would say there are definitely a few.
Awesome. So the next question that we had submitted earlier, how frequently should engagement metrics be reviewed and adjusted to stay relevant?
I think that it sort of is dependent upon your organization. So my personal preference, especially with like engagement surveys, would be that we would do them quarterly. We tried to do that. It just wasn't very effective within our organization. And so we moved to more of an annual, and then I guess an annual for a larger kind of feedback opportunity. And then we do have like 1 or 2 more topic specific feedback opportunities that we do throughout the year. So this is, again, like one of the reasons we're trying to move to also including sort of some of those participation metrics where we can pull metrics from other sources. That way it doesn't feel as much like a burden to employees to be, asking, can you please provide us some feedback, through this survey or whatever. So yeah, I guess that's my answer to that one.
Yeah, I was going to say survey fatigue is real. So as people start to do them more and more frequently, they just don't want to, which you get, right? In an ideal world, if you're actioning a lot of the things that are coming out of them, they see the value in it. But even still, if you're doing something super frequently, they're going to kind of get burnt out. So potentially looking at your frequency and maybe changing what kind of metrics is important.
I think also one of the challenges, especially with regard to like the actions piece, like Jav mentioned, was that like, depending on the size of your team too, as a people team, you only have so much capacity to take action quickly. And so sometimes I think you can come across an issue where it can look like maybe the feedback they're giving isn't being actioned on, when really it's just like, oh, you haven't been able to deliver on that feedback yet. Like it's still in the works. So I think like there's also kind of that risk with like over surveying.
Yeah, do you guys see any like warning signs when it's maybe time to evolve your strategy or like your tools or frequency with these surveys? Like, is there anything you look out for?
I would say like the rate of response to your surveys is usually a pretty good indicator. When like no one is filling it out, you're like, okay, everyone hates this. So it's time for you to think of something different. And sometimes, I mean, you know, as Hallie mentioned, it's just talking to people, right? Sometimes people will tell you like, I really hate doing the survey, or you check, you know, one of the places that I've worked previously, you know, we did like an annual survey, and you could see kind of leading up to the end of the period, how much, like what percentage of people had filled it out. And so, you know, if you were like being like, please fill out your, you know what I mean? You kind of wonder how much people value that process if you've only had a small portion of people actually fill it out and you have to push them to do it, for example.
I think it's also looking at like, and knowing what's going on within your org. Are you going through, like, we had a huge product launch in the spring. So now is not the time to be sending out an engagement survey. Like I don't want any distraction from my team to be presented to the rest of the org, because people are already overloaded. So trying to like take some of that stuff into account too, I think is key.
And I think we also have to be alive to the fact that other departments and other groups might be doing surveys as well, right? For different things. And we need to, I think as Jav mentioned, there is survey fatigue. And just because we're doing an engagement piece of a survey, that doesn't mean that they haven't had 2 or 3 other surveys that have come through from different departments. So it's really critical that we understand what the company is doing overall, and then align what we are doing as far as trying to understand engagement with those overall pieces of it as well.
Love that. Yeah, big picture is important. What else is going on is important. Yeah, are they getting all these other surveys? Yeah, for sure. We actually had another question submitted from Alexis. So her question is, in what ways have you achieved, or what things have you done to create the leader buy-in necessary to make the impactful changes needed to improve engagement? In other words, how do you get the big bosses to listen?
I would say, you know, you guys shared some great statistics earlier on. So depending on the type of leader that you're working with, if that's going to sway them, I think they need to understand why what you do with people and how focusing on employee engagement is going to really help them from a bottom line perspective. And if you can tie the two together and they can understand that, I think it becomes a much easier conversation versus it just being something that comes across as, you know, potentially fluffy, or, you know, you just want to know, versus this is something that we need to know from a business lens, because it will help us be a better company, become more profitable, and, you know, keep our people engaged.
I'm going to go. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Frey.
You're good.
No, you go.
I think, as Jeff mentioned, the correlation is really important. So you have to really understand the correlation and then be able to communicate it. So part of what you're looking for is how it's impacting your bottom line. A lot of times that's how you're going to get a leader's buy-in on it, right? And so if in every exit survey you have done, people are saying the same thing, and then you're looking at the engagement survey and it's saying, we really want this, you know, this will help us with that. And the people who are leaving are saying, I'm leaving because I didn't have this. then you can then correlate that to revenue, money walking out the door, right? That's your bottom line. And that gives you it gives you better visual for your leadership to then go, oh, okay, well, maybe I need to invest in this, or maybe I need to make a change in this to better help. And that helps with the engagement piece as well.
So I'm going to take it a step further and say, I think like one of the key things too with getting the big bosses to listen is understanding what their motivators are. So what metrics do they really care about, and finding ways to tie the data you have to those specific metrics, I think is super important. And again, like telling the story and making your case.
Love it. I think that's the last live question we have for you guys. Any other thoughts you guys want to share around employee engagement before we start to wrap up?
I would just say that this is probably a pretty exciting time for HR to be able to have these types of tools available to them and get these insights and be able to action them. And as Hallie mentioned, tie them to kind of the organizational goals, which allows us to kind of have that seat at the table that we've kind of talked about a lot from an HR lens. So I think it's an exciting time to have these tools available.
Great. Thank you, guys. We'll keep it rolling. So before I end, I just want to thank this panel for joining us and sharing their thoughts on measuring engagement. You guys shared some awesome strategies, and I can't wait. I always write the recap blog, so I'm excited to write that up and include some great quotes from you guys. So thank you so much. If you're here live with us today, you are pre-registered for our upcoming episodes. The next 3 sessions include the digital workplace, trends and innovations for 2025, enhancing engagement strategies for a better digital experience, and leading through change, building a resilient culture. If you have peers or colleagues who would find this series valuable, please feel free to share it with them. That link is still in the chat if you scroll to the top, as well as our free trial link if you do want to try out GoProfiles. And then, yeah, that's it. Thank you again for joining us today, and we'll see you in our next episode in November. Thank you.